Hello, I'm Just John, and today I'm going to go over some of the settings in Rekordbox to help those of you who, want to learn more about what the different settings do. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure we're on export mode here. So export mode is generally the mode that's meant for if you're exporting tracks or playlists to your USB so that you can take your USB to go play. Whereas performance mode is a mode that where if you're playing on your computer or laptop, using a DDJ while you're connected to Rekordbox, theoretically you can just be on performance mode and still export everything to your USB, but there are settings related to your USB that you can only find here. So we want to make sure that we start here. Cool. So we're going to File, Preferences. Language, pretty self-explanatory. Font size, yeah, we're going to skip all these. Layout, tree view. So basically, I think on default you have like a bunch of these, like this. And your record box might look like this. I don't use related tracks. I don't use iTunes. I don't use Beatport. I don't use Explorer. So kind of just leave it like this. Just leave everything unchecked. Up to you. Maybe there are, certain things here that you use or you want to keep on. Yeah, not really anything worth talking about here. Cool. Let's talk about waveform. So for color of waveform, there's 3 different settings. I'm a very strong believer that RGB is the best of the 3, but it is preference. But I will explain what all 3 of them do and how they function. So essentially, when you're looking at your waveform, so let's look here at this track. RGB says your low frequency, so that's going to be like your kick drums, your basses, that's going to be in red. Your mid frequencies, so that's going to be your vocals, your snares, that's going to be green. And then your high frequencies, like your hi-hats, that's going to be in blue. So what I like about RGB is I think it's very easy at a glance to see the different phrases of the song, essentially. So as you can see here, not a lot of red, more greens and blues. So that's probably the buildup of the track. But once you get to here, very, very heavy red. So that's probably the drop of the track. And then, yeah, you could see same thing here. Build up, drop. There's probably like a little refrain before the second half of the drop. That's for an electronic song. Let's say you're looking at a non-electronic song. Up here, you'll have greens, vocals. So vocals only, it looks like, nothing else. Probably an intro to the track where it's just singing. Here you have some reds, some blues. So probably the verse of the song, mostly still vocals, but some drums kicking in, some other instruments kicking in. And then here you have like a very heavy red, but also really just all the colors. So that's probably the chorus of the track. So yeah, for me, it's very easy to see this in the waveform in the preview here. I guess one other note is the size of the waveform is the amplitude, or like how loud the volume is. So here it's quieter, and then in the drop it's much louder. Cool. So blue is the default setting. Does theoretically have the same idea, right? Where you have the dark blue being the bass, and then the more white it goes, the higher the frequencies are. So you can still kind of see here like the different sections of the track for these electronic tracks. For this one, maybe a little bit harder. Can't really tell the difference between the verse and the chorus. Really a preference thing, but I think for me it's very difficult to read what's going on in the track in this mode. And then 3-band is the blues are the bass, the orange is the mids, and then the whites are highs. But what this does, it gives you the entire like waveform, like broken down as like a stacked ratio. So as you can see here in the drop here, that the blue is larger than the whites and the oranges, but you can still see all 3, right? But that's how you'd sort of see like, okay, cool, here, mostly orange and white, probably build up, here, mostly blue, that's the drop. Same with here, you can see mostly orange here, so it's mostly vocals, but then here you can see sort of the chorus is all 3, but it's still mostly blue. So you can still kind of see if you like look carefully, especially in like the actual track itself, you could see in the ratio, you could see here like the blue, orange, and white. So you can see the breakdown of that, and you can kind of use that to see the phrasing. My opinion, RGB is much clearer to me at a glance to see what's going on in the track than the other 2. The next is full versus half. Really, it's just, so is the preview going to show you like both the top and bottom half of it? Or if it's half, it just shows you the top half of it. Once again, preference thing. Current position bars, yeah, that's fine. You can leave it as a default. Yeah, this is all fine. Next, let's talk about key display format. So the key is basically like what key the song is in. Classic will give you your standard like musical notation, right? From A through G. You have your flats or sharps, and then you have minors and majors. That's great, and that's probably sort of maybe makes more sense for a lot of people who know the basics of music, or people who know a ton about music, right? Who know about music theory. I find for DJing, especially if you want to get into like harmonic mixing at some point, alphanumeric is much easier for you to understand which keys will go together without knowing all the music theory. If you are someone who knows all that stuff without it, and that's great. For me, I don't. So I find alphanumeric is much easier because it gives you a number and then the letter A or B. And then the way you can, there are different rules for how you harmonic mix. But like, for example, you know that something that's 6B will go with a song that's 6A because they both share the number 6. So there's different little patterns like that that you can use to recognize what songs might go together. Next, let's talk about the traffic light. So traffic light is basically like this track here is lit up green in the key because that's the current song that's playing. So if there are any other tracks here that were also 6B, they would also be lit up in green. And then they have 3 different related keys, and that's basically like how much more of different keys that are related that they'll show. So in related key 1, it'll show anything that shares the same number. So these both share 6. In related key 2, it'll also show anything that's related by same letter and then off by 1. So 6B and 5B, right? They both have a B, but 6 and 5, they're off by 1. And then related key 3 will also show things that are off by 1 number and then also by the letter, right? So 6B and 5A. I guess if you're a beginner, don't worry about harmonic mixing at all. If you're starting to get into it, I would say related key 2 is probably the easiest. I use same key because there are actually way more different rules for how you can harmonic mix besides these basic ones, which I have learned. So I just like to have the same key so I know. But as I scroll through the collection, I can see, okay, cool, I'm on 6B. So now I know in my head which keys will work with 6B and I can find those instead of relying on the colors to tell that for me. So I set it on same key. Cool. Audio, probably nothing really to talk about. It's just the audio settings of your computer. Let's go to analysis. So in track analysis mode, normal is basically like a static BPM. So it just assumes that the whole track is at 1 BPM and it'll say, cool, this track's at 80 BPM the entire time. Dynamic will change depending on the song. So if the song is like a song that starts at 80 BPM but goes up to 100, it'll sort of dynamically increase the BPM as it's playing. What I find though is dynamic is very finicky because it might be a track that's only at 80, but it might go up to 80.01, 80.02, or go down to 79.99, right? So it can get very annoying when you're trying to get the tempo fader right when it's like jittery like that. So generally leave it on normal. If you do have a track that does change in BPM, I find either put it in the comments or some people will like put it in the track itself, and that's how they know like, okay, cool, this starts at 80, but it's gonna go up to 100, so I should remember to keep track of that. For BPM range, preference, I mean, I guess all of these are preference. I believe 70 to 180 might be the default. The thing is, you can play a song at like halftime or double time, right? So a song that's at 70 BPM is really the same BPM as a song that's at 140, right? It's just every 2 beats for every 1, right? Because it's double the BPM. So it can be a little bit annoying to do that because you don't know, because you can mix a song that's at 70 and 140 together. So when you have 70 to 180, you might not be able to see all the tracks that you could be in a similar BPM range with. So generally people like to use one of these ones, which are like, it'll cut off at the double point, right? So 48 times 2 is 96, right? So it just goes 48 to 95. And anything that would be 96 and above gets recalibrated to 48 and above. So generally use one of these. I think it's going to depend on what sort of genres that you play. I play a lot of like bass music and then also pop music and house music. So for me, this like 78 to 155 is generally the highest that any track that I have will be at 155. And then yeah, there'll be a lot of slower, like maybe like hip hop songs that might be down to like 78. So I like to use this range. If you're playing like drum and bass, for example, generally your tracks are gonna go up to 175. So you might want to do this 88 to 175, or maybe it might go even higher. So you might want to go to 98 to 195. It's gonna depend on your collection and sort of what works for you. Track analysis settings. So basically this is when you upload a track into Rekordbox, what will it check for? Generally, I would say BPM and grid, and then also key is good to have selected. And then it'll just sort of populate these 2 columns. It's not going to be super exact. Like as you can see here, this song here is at 79.99. More likely than not, this song is at 80 and Rekordbox has just been slightly off. But you can always go and manually change that. The reason I don't have key on is I have a different software that is, in my opinion, does a better job of analyzing the key than Rekordbox does. I do pay for it. I'm not going to mention it here because they haven't sponsored me, so I'm not going to fucking give them a free promo. But I would say if you're, I mean, even if you're not getting to harmonic mixing, I think it's just good practice to have this key on because eventually you might want to learn it, and having this analyzed for all of your tracks up front is better than like later on having to like reanalyze all of your tracks. So just put it on. You don't even need to have this column showing if you don't want to. Auto analysis, yeah, just generally leave it enabled. Just means when you drop a track in, it'll automatically analyze it for you. Everything here, probably not worth talking about. Next, let's go to DJ system. So this is essentially like when you take your USB, you plug it into a CDJ or an XCJ, what are you going to see? How is it going to function? Waveform color we talked about, basically just make sure that this matches what you had in view. Waveform current position is kind of an interesting one. It does default to center, which I think like 99% of DJs use and is probably fine. But basically, when you're looking at the screen, uh, where is the line for the current position in the song? So here it's in the middle, right, of this entire bar. We're in the middle here. So everything that's before it is the part of the song that you just played, and everything that's after is a track that's coming up. If you hit left, instead this line will be like slightly to the left. So what you'll see is less, maybe 25% will be what you just played, and then the other 75% is the song coming up. I find generally when you're DJing, you care way more about the song that's coming up than what you just played. So having it to the left means you just get a longer preview than you would normally. Once again, doesn't super matter. Most people have it on center and it works just fine. Type of overview waveform, we talked about that, full versus half. That's fine. Same with this. Basically, just we want to make sure that these three settings are whatever you had set on view. So that way you don't get confused when you are playing somewhere else and all the settings are different. Category, sort, column. None of these are particularly of note here. Let's go to my settings. So in player, DJ settings, probably the thing to note here, eject load lock. That's an important one. Essentially, you want to put this on lock. I would say in most cases, what it does is if a track is currently playing and you try to load a track onto it, it won't let you. It'll say, hey, this track needs to be paused for you to load the next track on. And the reason you do this is sometimes you forget which side is playing, which channel is playing on, and you might try to load it onto that side. And if this is left on unlock, what will happen is it'll override the song that's currently playing to load the next song, and that next song is not playing. So it's basically just pause the music altogether. Very jarring. I've seen it happen to a couple people a couple times by accident. So this is sort of just prevents you from making that mistake. All this other stuff, probably not super. You can probably just leave it as a default. Cool. In the display, basically it's just like the brightness of the screens. I think it's defaulted to 3. I just set mine all to max. So in case for whatever reason the venue that I'm playing is like dark or the lighting is weird, just sort of make sure that I can see very clearly what's going on. So for all these settings, I just set them to like the max brightness essentially. Cool. In mixer, the fader curves, kind of important, especially if you're scratching or like how basically it's like how sensitive you want the volume fader to be. Probably fine to leave it on default. I have it set as this. For headphones, the default I believe is stereo here. I put mine as mono split. I prefer mono split. Basically, it means when you have your headphones in, one side will play the master channel, like the thing that's playing to everyone else, and then the other side will show the song that you're currently queuing up. So I find it's much easier for me to beat match or listen to it when I have them split on one ear each. But I think it's fine to do stereo. I mean, if you want, you can play around with both of those settings and see what you prefer and what is easier for you when you try to beat match. Yeah, all this not really super important to talk about. Once again, the display brightness I just put on max. I think that's everything here worth talking about. So now let's, just to make sure what you can do is here, you can click on your devices, and if your USB is plugged in, mine is, and then you can just sort of make sure all these settings are set to what they were in your settings, right? And then same with my settings. Yeah, you can just check all these and make sure that they're set. It should auto save, but this is just like a quick way of checking that everything's working. Before we go into performance mode, one last thing is if you are playing somewhere with your USB and you make some changes to the beat grid or you change some of the cues, what you can do is you can right click here and you can hit update collection. And when you do that, what will happen is all the songs, whatever cues and beat grid and whatever the metadata for that song is, it'll then get updated into your Rekordbox. Super useful if you do play a lot and you, like me, like to like change things on the fly. But when you do that, make sure that everything on your USB is up to date with everything on Rekordbox. That is to say, if you are like working on a set at home and you have some tracks and you have the cues or whatever set up for them, but you haven't yet uploaded them onto your USB because maybe that playlist isn't ready yet, right? So you didn't upload it yet. Make sure you upload it to your USB before you update collection. Because if you don't, what it'll do is your USB will override all the cues and such that you set on your Rekordbox. That happened to me once. It was such a pain. So please make sure you do that. But this is a very helpful function if you do play a lot on your USB. Cool. Now let's go to performance mode. So on performance mode, what we're going to do is just check the settings here. all these are the same. The only difference is controller, right? So controller is essentially the other one was like DJ settings, so like when you use your USB and play on a CDJ or XDJ. Controller is whatever controller or DDJ that you're using at home to play on. So generally, what you just want to do is make sure whatever the settings that you had that we set for the other thing is also set here, right? All this load lock stuff, yeah, all this stuff, just make sure that they match, so that way when you play at home versus when you play at a venue, it'll be the same experience and you won't be confused by the equipment. I mean, you'll probably be confused by the equipment anyways. The first time you use something, it'll be probably a little bit jarring to you, but you just get used to it. As you play, you'll tinker and you'll learn what the different things do, and then you'll eventually be comfortable and it'll be fine. So I think that's everything. So hopefully that was helpful to you. And yeah, thanks for watching. If you have any other further questions, I guess you can ask. If there's any like settings I didn't go over, you can ask and I'll answer them for you.